My name is Dumisam Mudiole. I am from the Department of Science and Innovation, and it is my privilege and honor to moderate this special session on international collaboration for sustainable development goals. In your programs, I think you will see there'll be 4 panelists. We're going to shift the order of speaking around a little bit. And the theme and the session overview is how to explore how international collaboration in space missions and data sharing can contribute to achieving global developmental goals, such as the United Nations SDGs. Speakers will highlight the importance of the partnerships between space agencies, governments, and other organizations to address these societal challenges. We have a lineup of speakers here who will, coming from different backgrounds, and they will just speak on the partnerships or the work that they are doing in responding to this theme. First, we will welcome Mr. Humbulani Mudau, who's the CEO for the South African National Space Agency, to speak on how we can position space science and technology as the main driver of Africa's development. He will set the scene, and then we will call the other panelists in the order that they are in the program. Thank you, Mr. Mudau.
Thank you, Ms. T. I would be quick, but I just thought that I should share with you how we can work together in ensuring that we do build strong intra-Africa partnerships. We're living in a world that is very unpredictable, and that world we call the VUCA world. It has become a new norm. We've seen a shift in geopolitics in many parts of the country, and therefore we're living in a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How do we ensure that we position ourselves? We have to have visionary leadership. We have to understand this uncertainty. We have to have clarity to solve complex issues that we're facing. And we have to be adaptable to some of these challenges that we're facing. We know the SDGs are there. There are quite a number of SDGs that space can play a critical role. And as we continue working together, let's just ensure that we do build programs that, of course, aligns with the efforts that the SDG has, so that we can respond to those. We know that satellite imagery is critical for decision making. Can we begin to shift and work towards building operational systems that will ensure that we do support decision makers, so that we can support the planning, we can support the policies, because this world requires that we build leadership that develop policies based on intelligence, insights, and information that we can provide in a number of areas that affects us as the continent and the country. We've spoke about food security this morning. You've seen the progress that we've made. Dr. Banda, we've already started chatting on how we can expand the program in other parts of the country. We saw how they're able to look at the crop health, soil conditions, weather patterns, and so on. So Mama Maria, gave evidence of how that has improved. Education, future-proof education, health innovation, space has a huge role to play. And we need to begin to look at the fusion of various data sets, from satellite navigation to satellite communications, to enrich product offerings. Environmental conservation, we know life on land and life below water, that space can play a huge role in ensuring that we do develop integrated water information systems. Africa, most part of it, very dry, and therefore how do we ensure that we respond to this? Infrastructure development, for our economies to grow in Africa, we need to really begin to look at how we invest on infrastructure. But we also require infrastructure here. I was saying to Dr. Sitki earlier during the week that you can imagine when Cairo and Cape Town merge or converge somewhere in Africa and what that will do to the rest of the continent. And we have to have that vision to work together, looking at our AIT facilities that we have in the Western Cape, what's in Cairo now, and say how do we empower the rest of the continent? How do we build constellations as a collective so that we can respond to all these societal challenges that we're facing in the African continent? Climate change, we did talk about that. We need to be looking at adaptation. We do have national adaptations plans. We've signed the Space Observatory for Climate. How do we access other global data to ensure that we do respond to climate change, as well as disaster risk reduction, which are huge challenges that we're seeing in many parts of the African continent. We have to demonstrate that in our efforts and to the investor, if they are putting money, what will be the return on investment? And therefore, we need to begin to think about building a space program that is underpinned by a very strong business case. We have to build this economic case for us to be able to attract investors and demonstrate that there will be a return on investment for the investors. And therefore, let's work together to create decent work, sustainable work, high-tech work, and move away or shy away from creating poverty jobs. The leadership we need for the continent, it's critical. That as we begin to look at transformational leadership, how do we work together? And this reminds me of the words of Inosu Satoro that said, individually we are one drop, together we are an ocean. And you can see it's a testament today with a number of headspace agencies that are here, that we need to build this inclusive vision. We need to build partnerships. We need to be adaptive and agile as leadership. Our mandates are to build sovereign capabilities for our nations. And I believe that if we start working together and provide the leadership that we need, we will be able to build our nations and create opportunities for youth and women across the African continent. Bilateral and multilateral agreements are critical. Let's build these constellations. Let's share the data. Let's do joint missions. Let's build education and networks because we need to build this talent pipeline. And we can only do that when we create an environment that's conducive, meaning that we have to build these labs, the AIT facilities, clean rooms across the African continent to ensure that we do this. And this reminds me of Mother Teresa when she said, I can do things you cannot. You can do things I cannot. Together we can do great things. And I believe that we can do that. Of course, we do have challenges, colleagues. The over-reliance of the African continent on donor funding for our space programs, we cannot do that. Hence, we need to build very strong business cases so that we can attract investors. We need to collaborate as Africans, and again, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. And I think change is coming to the continent. And I believe that when we prioritize, we look at policy advocacy, how we influence policy, when we look at resource mobilization, when we build capacity for the continent, we'll be able to reach that. And therefore, our unity is strength, And I say to all these countries that are here today, let's work together so that we can build the Africa we require and need. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and Dr. Modau, what an inspiring. You really did set the scene, and I think your codes, we need to really think about them and start implementing, working together. That's what he said. We need to empower one another as countries so that we move together instead of moving individually. Thank you for that. Continue with the theme. We will have next Ms. Dinyiko Njongwana, who is the Deputy Director, Africa Multilateral Cooperation at the DSI. And she will share with us on shared economic and social development through strategic multilateral arrangements. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me there at the back. I'd just like to recognize some of the important people in the room. A warm welcome to our special guests as well from the continent, the heads of the African space agencies and the African space institutions that are here with us today. And obviously, Mr. Humbulani Modau, the Chief Executive Officer of the South African National Space Agency, and DDG Boneni Muofe. And just a warm welcome as well to everyone else. You are all recognized, all protocol observed. I'm part of the Africa Multilateral Cooperation Directorate at the Department of Science and Innovation, and I'm responsible for our engagements with multilateral institutions in the continent. So this includes the African Union and also the AU Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD. And today I'm just going to be providing an overview of what I think could be some of the opportunities that could be leveraged by the space sector in South Africa and also in the continent as far as the support mechanisms that have been provided through multilateral institutions such as the African Union. And I'd like to premise my intervention this afternoon by highlighting a statement which may be considered a little bit controversial, but I think is potentially useful in shaping how we should think about groundbreaking partnerships that will enable South Africa and other African countries to derive the transformative impact of space. And this statement is that space is congested, contested, and competitive physical domain of growing strategic importance. I'm going to repeat that. Space is a congested, contested, and competitive physical domain of growing strategic importance. Space is congested. What does that mean? If you've been watching the news over the past couple of days, you may have picked up on the reports of a meteorite or a space object that kind of came into the South African atmosphere just off the just off the coast of Cape St. Francis Bay in the Eastern Cape. And initially, some of the speculations were that that object could have been the result of space debris. And it could have been the result of some sort of debris that maybe came into contact with the satellite. And I thought this was quite interesting because actually some 11,000 satellites ranging from the size of a desktop computer to a school bus currently reside in low Earth orbit. Another 20,000 satellites are on track for launch by 2030. Adding to this orbital clutter is an estimated 170 million pieces of space debris floating around, which risk colliding with satellites and taking them offline at any time. And you can only imagine what the implications, obviously, of that would be. So space is congested, and then space is contested. The fact that space is contested is not new. I think it was Dr. Maserumula from the CSIR who mentioned the outer space race, which started back in the 1950s. And this outer space race continues today, with both governments and the private sector companies wanting to leverage space for both economic and military expansion. And here we need to ask ourselves, with regards to space being a contested space, where South Africa is and where Africa features in this. Space is competitive. According to the World Economic Forum, by 2035, the global space economy is set to reach 1.8 trillion US dollars. And this is up from 630 billion US dollars in 2023, which was just last year, and averaging a growth rate of 9% per annum. And this 9% is actually just above the global growth rate of the global GDP, which I think is quite interesting. And space-based and/or enabled technologies such as communications, positioning, navigation and timing, and Earth observation services are expected to be the key drivers of this growth. Again, I ask, where is South Africa? Where is the rest of the continent? And how do we feature in this? And then lastly, space is of growing strategic importance. Although the average individual rarely directly interacts with space, almost all aspects of modern economies connect to space. I think everyone here in this room this afternoon understands this and is fully aware of this. And as space becomes more integrated into the daily lives of citizens, the impact of space activities on economies and society is growing stronger and reaching further. Defense sector, businesses that pursue emerging opportunities within the space economy may gain a first mover advantage. And I think it was Umama from Bronco Spray who was able to illustrate this quite practically. So in terms of multilateral arrangements, what are the implications and what does this actually mean? So I think the first aspect is that we also need to be aware of some of the threats that currently exist globally, and I think Mr. Mudau kind of alluded to this. And I specifically want to make reference to two such threats, one being climate change, and how Africa is the hardest hit by climate change, and secondly, also the growing incidence of armed conflicts in Africa. Earlier this year, you may have been aware, if you watched the news quite closely, that there were quite a number of floods in East Africa. This included Kenya and also Tanzania. Those floods led to a lot of infrastructure damage, but also people were displaced as a result of the flooding. Human settlements were also affected as a result of the flooding in those countries. And just this month here in South Africa, in the Western Cape province, we also had floods which basically did exactly the same issue. Infrastructure was damaged as a result of 3 dams that kind of caved in, and again, people on the ground were displaced and found themselves without housing. In addition to that, just in terms of armed conflicts, an additional 3.2 million Africans have been displaced due to armed conflict over the past year in Africa. This represents a 13% increase and continues an upward trend observed since 2011. So we are seeing an increased incidence of armed conflicts in Africa. It's not going down, it's actually going up. And for perspective, 40 million forcibly displaced people is more than the population of Angola, Ghana, and Morocco. And one of the greatest concerns is that these conflicts are challenging to monitor, and they are also challenging to track, just in terms of their impact on the ground. And so in the instance of both of these threats, which I've highlighted, climate change, armed conflicts, space offers a multiplicity of solutions, applications, and services right across the innovation value chain. And the African Space Policy and Strategy, which responds to the African Union Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy, as well as Agenda 2063, gives us an impetus through which this can be achieved. Something that we must, I think, commend the African Union for is actually the adoption of the African Space Policy and Strategy, which we, as the Department of Science and Innovation, together with other countries from the continent, were quite instrumental in developing. And I think the strategy is very forward-looking. It provides us with a very strong foundation of the kind of multilateral partnerships that we can build, the kind of cross-border bilateral partnerships that we can build in making sure that we leverage the opportunities that exist just from a space perspective. So, what can South Africa and other African governments and their space agencies do to leverage multilateral arrangements as far as space is concerned? Well, on the climate change and armed conflicts side, we see that there are multiple crises, as I've mentioned: damage to infrastructure, natural disasters, disease outbreaks, displacement of people, new and often informal human settlements, and migration. All of these factors can be monitored and modeled through space applications for various uses. African governments and African space agencies should consider developing a data sharing policy that ensures affordable and equitable access to spatial data and information. And we have the capabilities to do that on the continent. But I think, as Mr. Mudau also mentioned, we tend to rely a lot on some of our foreign partners beyond Africa's borders. And all of this requires as well, I must mention, the development of infrastructure that can collect and process this data in ways which are relevant to the needs of end users, specifically within the African context. And we are speaking, and this should be the case whether we are speaking about technocrats that are sitting in government buildings, whether we're speaking about disaster management officers in municipalities, or even the e-health or agricultural SMME. And some of this infrastructure is there, as I've mentioned, and it exists right here in South Africa. It exists in the likes of Mauritius. It exists in Egypt. So how can we pull all of these efforts together and what already exists to actually create groundbreaking partnerships that can ensure that what we have access to in terms of data infrastructure actually works for us, and it actually works for our context and our needs. Lastly, we cannot speak about Africa's socio-economic development without speaking about industrialization. And therefore, I'd like to also echo the words of one of our space sector leaders in South Africa, who mentioned that maybe there's a need for us as African governments, African space agencies, maybe we need to move away from our positioning of the space sector as a science endeavor and move towards space as an industrial endeavor. And I think this is important, and it's something that we need to unpack. And in addition to that, we need to unpack the value proposition from an economic development perspective of industrial scale, local manufacturing of space technologies and services. And in addition to this, we need to facilitate and promote the integration of the space sector with other sectors, including energy, public health, the environment, climate change, the management of resources, as well as information and communication technology. And I think here, another multilateral instrument which exists, which is very important, is the African Free Trade Continental Area. So I think it provides mega opportunities for Africa's space industry, irrespective of where the different industries are, irrespective of which country we are speaking about, just in terms of the innovation value chain, because it forces us to start thinking about value chains that can be created within the sector. One of the speakers earlier spoke about the manufacturing of components. Is that something that can happen right across the continent? Can we work together as African governments in developing the African space sector? Thank you for your indulgence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Njongwana, for sharing with us those facts and also highlighting some of the policies and strategies that we have as a continent that we can leverage on for those African partnerships. Next, we will have Mr. Harvey Short. Mr. Short is a director for NAPED Partnerships and APRM at the Department of International Relations and Corporations of South Africa. He will speak to us and look at multilateralism. Multilateralism, yes, the focal point of South Africa's foreign policy and African renaissance.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I also recognize my fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I asked myself the question, what am I doing here at the National Space Conference? And I answered myself by saying, but you did watch Apollo 13 a couple of years ago, so that qualifies you. So I belong to the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, where we do, in our global governance branch, we do have a space desk, and one of my colleagues, maybe if he can just stand up, is from that desk. So they look at space from a global governance point of view. However, I'm not of that unit. I am from the Africa Union Business Unit, where my portfolio is NAPAD, the outer NAPAD Africa Union Development Agency. And also the partnerships. We look at the AU partnerships with, for example, China, FOCAC, which was referred to by Dan du Toit earlier today. Last week we had the TCAT Ministerial, this is the Japan-Africa. In about 2 months' time we'll have Russia-Africa, we'll have Turkey-Africa, we'll have India-Africa. Next year beginning we have EU-Africa, we have US-Africa. There are about 14 of these partnerships, so that's my responsibility. So I'm a little bit out of depth, and I'll be using my prepared speech. I apologize, I have a slight issue with sight, so, and the lighting here is very bad. So the African continent prioritizes sustainable development, which forms the essence of my presentation. On the international aspects of our interest and our involvement in space and in space-related activities. The premise that I wish to emphasize is that space-based products and services have a critical role to play in meeting national and continental priorities, and as underpinned, thank you very much, that's of great assistance. In Genesis 1 verse, I think it's verse 3 said, and the Lord said, let there be light. And there was light, and the Lord said, that is good. Yeah, so I think this development is captured in the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but also specifically then the AU Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. I think you would know that this Africa we want, this Agenda 2063, was adopted by the Africa Union in 2013 We've now, in this year, we've started with a second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. So South Africa places a very large priority on that, on Agenda 2063. African leaders have thus sought to ensure that the African Union's space and space policy and strategy is embedded in Agenda 2063 as one of its 15 flagship programs. This serves to guide both the sector development as well as the operations of the African Space Agency, AFSA, which was inaugurated in January 2024 and is headquartered in Egypt. I think it was previously mentioned, that this agency in Egypt, and if we can meet somewhere in between on the continent. The African Union's commitment to space has accelerated the growth of African space industry, as evidenced by more than 20 national space agencies and/or space-related institutions that have been established on the continent over the last 5 years. To ensure the effective uptake and utilization of space products and services, certain building blocks are needed to establish robust national and regional space ecosystems. These ecosystems must include the following 4 primary elements to function. 1, the human capital required to establish and operate these space initiatives. 2, a significant industry base to capitalize on the commercial aspects of the space sector. 3, the requisite infrastructure needed to support the space value chain. And 4, international cooperation to ensure the knowledge transfer and dissemination. So the applicants and problem-solving innovations provided by space products and services are endless. However, in order to take advantage of this, Africa needs very strong governance. I think you refer to it as leadership. Very strong governance and institutional architecture. The Africa Space Policy and the strategy documents both provide a framework for the continent's space priorities. The former highlights Africa's goals and priorities, and the latter details the programmatic elements for implementation. The golden thread in both documents is Africa's desire to enhance space capabilities. It should be noted that there are many institutions leading efforts to build space capacity and skills on the African continent, i.e. the International Space University in France, which offers programs that provide a holistic overview of the complex global space sector, and the African Space Leadership Institute that was established in order to develop capacity in space policy, law, and strategy. So, coming back to the partnerships that we deal with, a series of international interagency and industrial partnerships took effect in 2023 to bolster local capacity and capability. Examples include, Don de Tooy referred to him and his minister joining the president of South Africa this weekend in China for the 2024 China, it is called the FOCAC, the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, which is a state visit, a number of ministers going and looking at China-South Africa cooperation, but then finishes as this Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, where there'll be 53 heads of state from Africa looking at inter alia, the Chinese global development initiative, and with a specific sector on space. There is also the Russia employing the BRICS consortium as a means of involving partners in joint scientific research. The Egyptian Space Agency rallying the support of Azerbaijan and China to augment its satellite systems and manufacturing, assembly and testing facilities. The EU Space Dialogue, which further solidified the EU as a development partner for the continent in the area of space cooperation. At the same time, the USA also constitutes to explore avenues for engaging with Africa, first during the US-Africa Space Partnership Roundtable, which was a precursor to the US-Africa Space Forum, hosted in Washington in December 2022. More recently, the participants from both regions met in the International Astronautical Congress 2023 that was held in Baku in Azerbaijan for the US-Africa Commercial Space Stakeholders Meeting. There's obviously mutual respect. There's a willingness to forge a pathway to meaningful cooperation between them. I think also an example, and I'm surprised that it hasn't been mentioned today, is the SKA, where South Africa, for the South African component, has a very close collaboration with at least 18 countries on the continent in terms of that project. So, Madam Moderator, Africa's growing space ambitions and untapped potential mark an unprecedented opportunity to consider how space activities can be leveraged to achieve the common good. With the right approach, right commitment, and the right investment, Africa can rapidly change the fate of its citizens by effectively using space science and technology to support and drive its development agenda. The African Space Policy and Space Strategy, which were adopted in 2016 and 2017 respectively, seek to realize Africa's ambition to develop a well-coordinated and well-integrated African space program that is responsive to social, economic, political, and environmental needs of the continent, as well as being globally competitive. And it comes into what the previous speaker said about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the operationalization of that, all aspects in terms of value chain, in terms of the AFCFTA, can be supported, through our focus on space. South Africa is committed to international cooperation for mutually beneficial and peaceful uses of outer space. We are also of the firm belief that countries should not be discriminated from implementing their respective development strategies. Accordingly, the national space policy in South Africa focuses on harnessing the space technologies and applications, among others, towards contributing to South Africa's economic growth and social development. I want to conclude. In the coming years, it's hoped that South Africa's space sector will have established world-class satellite assembly, integration, and testing facilities, developed a suite of sensors for Earth observation, and launched a series of low Earth orbit satellites. Given that it's 25 years since we've done the first one, while developing indigenous technology and capabilities, the program will further enable the acquisition of high-resolution data, including synthetic aperture radar data, to ensure availability of data to support data-driven decision-making. It's expected that South Africa's international cooperation with the major and emerging space-faring nations will continue to increase. Madam Moderator, I wish to end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Short, for sharing with us those cooperation opportunities that are there for us. And I think it's up to us now, maybe the African heads of space agencies, to go back to our governments and engage with our international departments there, so that we use these opportunities. He said also, with the right approach and commitment, we can change and respond to these societal challenges that we have. Lastly, we will have Dr. Mboneni Mufe, who's the DDG at the DSI for Socioeconomic Innovation Partnership. He's also the GEO Group on Earth Observations co-chair and our Africa Caucus chair for GEO. He will speak about leveraging global and regional partnerships for collaboration in space science and innovation. Thank you.
afternoon. Standing here, I can actually see who's angry and who's smiling, so don't make you name and shame and identify you. So thanks very much. I just want to acknowledge the previous speakers who have basically laid the foundation for what I'm going to say, and to some extent also made my life very difficult, because when you come in after the caliber of speakers that we have had, you've got to scramble. When you're sitting there, you're like, I wish he or she doesn't mention this because I want to mention it. So you've made my life very difficult, all of you. But the little that I probably still have that I can share with you, I do think that there is a lot that we need to still achieve as a continent, riding on the back of space science and technology. And we've got a couple of things going in our favor. Some years back, you would stand up and be talking about Africa and science, and there wasn't even a single country in the continent that had a Ministry of Science and Technology. But today we can stand and say almost every country would have a Ministry of Science and Technology, or the variant thereof, which simply means that there is an acknowledgement at government level that we cannot do without science and technology. Now, what excites me the most is that we have gone a step further. And there is now a realization that space science and technology is actually going to be the one that takes us where we are supposed to be. When we talk about Africa's development, the CEO of the space agency, South African National Space Agency, clearly showed the relationship between some of the SDGs and space science. And actually, it is not some. It is all of them. When you look at the goals such as zero hunger, nothing explains the role of science better than what happened here this morning during the opening session. And out of that, you have a very important aspect of partnership, which is partnering with the users and the communities. And this is one of the areas where for many years, science and technology hasn't, and even more space science has never considered. Because we have always thought that when we talk about space science, we talk about something that has got to go to look up and you see things, or you look down from up there. The horizontal part of it, which says, what do we do after we have looked up and after we have looked down, is to then go to our community and say, from what we have seen up there, the water challenges that we have, what is the space science telling us? The type of the soils that you have, and how much they are able to or unable to provide the food for you, can we solve using space science? We can easily, as a continent, avoid this whole tag of still talking about hunger, about the impact of climate change to the extent that we experience it, if we are collaborating on matters of space science and technology. Besides the fact that we grow all the coffee, the cocoa and everything, and we send it abroad and we buy it again. Except that when we buy it for more than we have sold it for. fact that the world is now looking at green energy technologies. And when we talk about partnerships, we don't see, for example, the working together between government and their space sciences and the private sector in the continent working together to say, what does it mean when we talk about green energy? There is no green energy solutions without Africa. Just go and look at the minerals that are used, whether it is in the energy storage, and every single one of them, you'll find them here. But then the question is, do we even know, have we even scratched the surface in terms of what we have? Because every now and then, we are seeing discoveries of this and that in this continent. We're seeing discoveries of gas, discoveries of oil, discoveries of minerals. And for those head of space agencies, which of our space agencies have been involved in the mapping of these resources? Please raise up your hand. And the reason why I'm asking this question is that, let me just share with you some staggering figures. And they say sometimes people never do anything until they are angry with the status quo. And in the African continent, we seem to be very happy with the status quo. And the status quo is that we have been developing for the past, since I was born. We've been developing. And I'm very old, I can tell you. So to date, and these figures, you can dispute them, but they are round about there. It is estimated that the current size of the Africa space economy is about $19.5 billion. Now, if you are a South African and you're talking about rands, I'll just get dizzy. And there's some breakdown, and I didn't go through all of it. And when we talk about, for example, global navigation and related services, $11.7 billion. Satellite television, and every one of us here interact with that service on a daily basis. $5.6 billion. Satellite manufacturing, $230 million. Remote sensing, about 170 thereabout million dollars. Ground segment, about 40 thereabout million dollars. How much of this is coming to the African continent? Because there's one thing about saying this is what the economy is worth. And it's another to say this is who this economy is benefiting. So a simple question would be, just on the manufacturing of satellites, what share do we have? And some of these things, we will never achieve them because we are not working together. Now, and this not working together is not only like between countries. It's not about South Africa and Uganda or Zimbabwe and Botswana. In most cases, it's even about South Africa and South Africa. And in most cases, it is not even about South African private sector and South African government. It's about South African government and South African government. And I'm quite pleased that we've got a lot of colleagues here from various other government departments. And if we've got any dream of coordinating an African space economy, there is no way that we're going to do what we are supposed to do divided. It's not going to happen. We can dream and we can pat each other on the backs, and we can come here next year again and we say, oh, by the way, last year we agreed that we were going to meet. Let's meet. And the way we say it these days, say, let's have coffee. And that coffee never happens. So these partnerships will never happen until such time that we are angry with the way we're doing things and we decide to change. Professor C.S. Mostert did a presentation here which shows how the South African space sector has actually evolved over the years. Exciting stuff. And I want to say, even here in South Africa, we haven't even done a fraction of what the potential of the space sector is because of the reasons that I've said. Now let's come to where we really need to partner. Firstly, we need to partner in research and development. We need to invest in research and technology development. And that is where the partnership is going to need to be. On the bilateral and multilateral partnerships that have been mentioned here, what stops us from saying we are starting, and it can only just be the head of space agencies that are here, to say we're going to start a space cooperation program. We're going to do research. We're going to do technology innovation. We're going to start to move towards manufacturing. Now, how much does a satellite cost? African continent. Are we saying that this thing costs so much that the countries represented here can't even manufacture one Earth observation satellite? One. And start to lay claim to the 19.5 billion rand of this space economy for the African continent. So that at least even when we do our own planning and policy development, our colleagues from Malawi, you are able to monitor the fish stock in Lake Malawi. My own countrymen, you are able to have a full view of the 3-kilometer coastline and the depth of it going up to the Antarctica, without going and beg and saying, oh, we got flooding in KZN. Can we really trigger some of those multilateral agreement stuff? So just give us the imagery, you know. And this kind of partnership is really what is going to help us to build that. Now, The space sector is a very interesting sector in the sense that it is one where governments can never bail out of. Never. The others, we can move out and we say, oh, the private sector is going to deal with it. And we can learn a lot from the USA, by the way. A lot of the work that NASA is supposed to be done, we now know that SpaceX is doing the bulk of it. We got a lot of programs that are being run by the lack of under the 100-year Starship under Dr. Mae Jemison. So that means that government has got to, and our government must really come forward to seed this sector so that it can grow and be successful. We can then have the private sector that feeds, and when the private sector feeds from this, it's not just those companies that benefit. It is Umama here who was talking. It is our municipalities that are struggling to provide clean water that then begins to benefit, that then starts to know that for us to plan, we need to have Earth observation data, and that we need to monitor and manage people building in flood lines and also in areas that are ecologically sensitive, including wetlands. But we are not able to provide that information and data. And when this ecosystem of industry, government, and communities' collaboration is actually sparked, everything will fall together. So, this for me is very crucial. I want us to say, what are we taking? The future renewable energies. It's us that are sitting here who are in the African continent. The future environmental sustainability, food security, is us that are sitting here. But until such time that we stand up and not wait for somebody to come from outside and say, oh, by the way, just behind your house, this is what you have. And, oh, just in your lake, just on your coastline, this is what you have. And this is why we also have a lot that gets compromised in our backyards. And even though I'm not qualified to say this, even including our own security gets compromised because we are not owning this thing called space. Thank you. I hope you get angry.
Thank you so much, DDG. I don't think there's anything more that I can say after that talk. I think you closed it well. Ladies and gentlemen, so this morning we were told that we do have our brothers and sisters and Mr. Mudau's armies and friends who are from the other African space agencies. We will ask some of them to give remarks after this session. I think we would like their thoughts on some of the things that we discussed this morning. I'm going to ask from where you're sitting, heads of space agencies from Angola, in that order, DRC, Egypt, Gabon, and Ghana to give us a few remarks. I think you can use the mics to save time. Or if you want to come up, you're also welcome to do so.
Good morning, everybody.
Afternoon.
Oh, it's afternoon. Oh, my God. Good afternoon, everybody. Brother Mbolani, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us. I think all the protocols observed by now. And I also like to say, starting, that I am son of South Africa, and I'll explain why. So when we see today what is South Africa and what they have been doing in space. In 2006, I came to South Africa as a student, and I didn't know what to do in life. And actually, the South Africa ecosystem, in terms of space education, gave me the pathway to be able to create a space strategy where we have today in Angola. And make Angola to be one of the top 10 largest space programs today. My remarks, I am a very direct person, right? We have been discussing since morning a lot of politics, right? And today, if we pay attention, the values that we as Africa need to hold, it goes even lower than what we've been discussing, starting with discipline, right? If you are not disciplined, doesn't matter how much budget you have and how smart you are, you won't get there. This is my first remark. Second is, even before we decide to cooperate with each other, we need to talk the same language. We don't talk the same language. What do I mean by that? I have experience in talking with a lot of countries who are doing space or leading space worldwide. And the challenge that I get all the time is understanding what is banana in space instead of orange. And sometimes we Africans are very good pretending that we are smart. So meaning that we need going back to the drawing board and make sure we work on the basics before we can fly. This was tough lessons learned, right? When I was appointed DG of Space Agency, I thought putting a satellite in orbit was me, myself, be fancy, right? And that's it. It's much harder than that. So if we see today how we're spending money in the continent, Africa is the least connected continent in the world. Only 36% Africans are using internet. 36% out of 1.4 billion Africans. And we are buying satellites capacity from foreign countries. Doesn't make sense. And we are talking about lunar exploration and deep space. So when my government said, Zolana, what do we need in space? I said, let's focus on connectivity first. Because if we don't connect Angolans, we are shouting in void. It's like, it's 10%, 20% getting access of what country of government want to relay out there. So I don't want to exceed myself because today we did not do well in time management. I will close here saying that we need to talk the same language before we can do greater things. Thank you.
DRC.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Okay. I thank the responsible of National Space Conference for giving us this opportunity. First, I beg your pardon because My English is bad. But I have to say something. I much appreciate this organization because in spatial domain, Africa must work together for space sustainability. As you know, my country, DR Congo, occupy the strategic position in Africa. So, this organization with master move and become African space event each year because at first time it was a national organization. Now we have invited some African countries to come participate. So we must work and help Africa to go on. So, before I end my speech, let me greet Mr. Mudau because he helped us to come here and to work together. Since last year, we signed the MOU with SANSA, and it's a new orientation for Africa and for the RC. Thank you a lot.
Egypt.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharif Sidki. I'm the CEO of the Egyptian Space Agency, and I would like to thank Mr. Madou for the invitation. And actually, I'm impressed for what I have seen over the last few days here in South Africa about the coherent system and the ecosystem that's really promising, that gives the hope in the future that there will be lots of potential to build a big ecosystem within the African continent. I think as far as Africa is concerned, there are lots of resources available, there are lots of talent available, and we need to make use of this opportunity by having the proper multilateral collaboration between the different stakeholders within the continent. I think we are in a dire need for having our own know-how to be instilled within the continent. And as far as I'm concerned personally, within Egypt, in my capacity as the CEO of the Egyptian Space Agency, all the facilities available in the agency are open completely for the full African continent. And actually we have lots of success stories of collaboration between Egypt and several African countries. And actually we need to expand this to the whole continent. And as has been mentioned by Mr. CEO of the South African Space Agency, if all the countries will join forces starting from the north to the south, I think we can have a very big impact. Everything is there. I don't think we miss anything. The resources are there, just the will that all of us have to work together, because no one will be able to do it alone. And as I mentioned, we are all open for that. All our resources are available. We have our resources in space, the satellites available. We can avail the data to whoever need the data for all the sustainable development goals of their countries. the technology that we have. We are open to share the technology and to grow and to learn from your experiences, especially what we have seen over the last days in South Africa, and how you started to do very reliable industries that's globally recognized and globally installed in several space flights. So I would like to thank you again, and I think we have a very bright future ahead, and we can work all together towards that future. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Madawe has asked me to say something, but I didn't quite hear him.
She did. I just wanted to say to my brother, Dr. Siddiqui, we're very proud of you. By the way, Dr. Siddiqui is the chairperson of the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space. And as Africans, we need to be really making use of him to advance our interest in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madawe. Gabon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you, Mr. Moulane, CEO of SANSA, for inviting us here. This is my first time with my team. We met several years ago in Libreville, my friend, and we talked about space. And you told me before go forward, you must thinking before the need of your countries. What we done, and we have now a strong document of the space policy in Gabon. Also, we deal with SANSA in many of meetings, in GMS before, and Africa Leaders Partnership. And I think cooperation and collaboration is very important, because alone it's difficult to go forward. And I want to tell to all the actors in space, SANSA and Egypt, and also Nigeria, to help the new actors. This is important, because all the meeting we learn, infrastructure is available, data is available, but nothing happened. After this meeting, we go back, and another meeting we told many things. Please help the new actors, and we have a strong MOU with SANSA, and I think after this meeting we go forward to make it very operational. Again, thank you, and see you in the next meeting.
Thank you. And lastly, Ghana.
So good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think all protocols observed. I'm very honored to be here to be part of this celebration. I'll say undoubtedly we all can't deny the importance of space science, especially to the socio-economic development of every country. And today what happened in the open section at least sends a signal that the results of the science that we do should relate to the people. And that is how we can get the people to buy in. I will commend the South Africa Space Agency and also the space sector for taking the leadership role in Africa. I would say a lot has been achieved by the team, and some of us, it inspires us to do more. And most of the times it's good to have big brother actually in the family, somebody that you look up to and somebody that can inspire you to do more. And I would say big thank you to them. Secondly, to what I would say is Ghana has a lot of some collaboration with South Africa in the space sector, especially with Sahel in terms of the SKA project, which is going swiftly. And also we want to have a deeper collaboration with SANSA, especially in capacity building and infrastructure development. From what Dr. Zolana said, we can achieve a lot, but we need to speak the same language. And speaking the same language means we should have the same understanding of what we want to achieve as a continent. Because I believe as a continent, there's a lot that we can do. but because we are fragmented, that is why we always seek help from outside, but we can look within. So I would say in unity, we can achieve a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the other representatives who could not speak. I will allow 2 questions from the floor. Can they just be straight and direct? I think we've lost a lot of time. So if we can have 2 questions or comments to our panelists. I don't have my glasses on, so I'm struggling to see.
Jumbo.
Okay, Kenya, Charles from the Kenyan Space Agency. I saw a hand there after Charles. I'm not sure.
Again, thank you. My name is Charles Mongi from the Kenya Space Agency. I also take this opportunity to send my greetings from the Director General, Brigadier Hilary Kipkosgei, who was not able to join us, but I represent him in this capacity, and I'm also using this opportunity to share our thoughts. I guess the question that we need to ask ourselves, and potentially also to South Africa, and it's no of a comment, is that we cannot, or we would not want you to fail as a sector, because that has a huge implications for the whole continent of Africa. If you don't get it right, you also deny us an opportunity to get it right. Because if the industry, because essentially, and most of us also work in government, we take lessons from those who succeed. And if you don't succeed in helping us get the value for the space sector for Africa, in the morning we saw the young voices that were speaking there. That is the future of space. If we do not deliver the necessary tools for them to be able to derive value, then we will lose a generation. We say we are going to have a young generation for Africa. But if we don't give them the necessary tools, then we fail. And I like what Dr. Mofle was indicating. They will get angry with us. And I think they need to get angry with us if we do not get that value for them. And we can get that value because it is there for us to be able to do that. And then the question that begs for all of us from the agencies is how then do we work together? There was a mention of the African Resource Management Constellation. Why can't we do it? Why can't we have a constellation for Africa? Why can't we develop the data platforms that was mentioned that we would then be able to derive value? Because data is data until when you get to process it, to get insight, then we not go anywhere. Thank you.
The other question was from at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Tiamo Motsepa. I'm the director for the African Open Science Platform. I was very, very encouraged to hear some of the remarks made by the panelists, especially Dr. Mofu, when he mentioned that a couple of years ago, we didn't have STI policies. I think a lot of countries now have done that. They've got STI policies and are in the process of developing space science policy strategies. My question is this: is there a value in developing regional programs around space sciences collectively, maybe a SADC, maybe also looking at regional programming in tandem with the implementation plans for those regional initiatives? Secondly, are we connecting the dots between the myriad instruments we have in the continent? For example, the AU Data Policy Framework, the space sciences strategies and the space science agencies work, and also, for example, the new revision of the STISA 2024 to STISA 2034 to infuse, for example, the open agenda, including the data sharing that we're talking about, and incidentally, the AU strategy for AI. I think maybe there is value here in terms of introspection and seeing whether we're connecting the dots so that we can move things in tandem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Thank you. brother. And thank you very much for the point that you've made. There's only one way that we will succeed as Africa or as Africans. And Dr. Mwape did put it very well. Said we're going to have to invest. And I said earlier on that for us to attract investment, we have to have a very strong business case or economic case. But space, it's a sovereign and a strategic capability. So it becomes very critical for government or those that are in power to understand that. Now, the point that you've made about the